Welcome, y'all. It's Wes with DIY Food Plot Pro. Thank you so much for joining us. Today's episode, we're going to talk about brassicas and fall plots and what we need to be doing to ensure that those plots are the most attractive to whitetails that we possibly can be. We're going to dispel some myths that a lot of folks believe in brassicas and some of the management things that we do that make those whitetails seek those brassicas out more so than what they already would. DIY Food Plot Pro is sponsored by Aircrow LLC, the Plot Protector Pro. Keep whitetails and other animals out of your food plots with the Plot Protector Pro. My name is Wes. I run the channel DIY Food Plot Pro. I've got a Bachelor of Science in Agronomy. I farm for a living, and I've got a 2,900 acre whitetail deer hunting outfitter in Western Kentucky where we cannot bait. So we rely heavily on these plots, such as the alfalfa plot that I'm standing in right now, to hunt the whitetails that we are blessed to hunt here in Western Kentucky. Brassicas are feast or famine, right? A lot of the guys up north claim brassicas are killer. A lot of the guys down south claim my deer don't ever touch them. We're kind of in that middle range here in Kentucky. But I have found some things over the years that really tend to help my brassica plots. But there's an awful lot of myths around brassicas that a lot of food plotters believe. The first and foremost, the very biggest one is that the brassicas get sweeter after the frost, which that is 100% not true. They have proven that, but yet you're still hearing big food plot guys talk about that. 100% not true. It doesn't happen. Nothing changes in that plant after a frost. It does not get any sweeter, and that is scientifically proven. Another thing is that it needs to be on your farm for 2 or 3 years before the whitetails use it. Now, I have seen that with my own eyes to where you plant this somewhere on a farm and doesn't really get hit the first year. The second year you plant it and all of a sudden the deer just absolutely just hammer it. But I've also had my fair share of plots where I planted, this is the first time I planted brassicas on this plot, and the deer absolutely hammered it, ate it all year long. Brassicas are a great late summer, early fall food plot. Then they extend all the way into the late winter. The thing I like about brassicas is it's very similar to those late summer, early fall plots that I was telling you about with soybeans and lab earlier. It's young, tender growth at a time of the year where there's not any young, tender growth. You think about the environment that our food plots are growing in August, September, depending on where you're at in the country. August or September is typically the plant date for brassicas. What's new and germinating at that point? Virtually nothing. If there's any ag around, it's almost to maturity at that point. There may be some older beans, but very few young, tender plants that whitetails seek at that point. So when we plant these brassicas, oftentimes we find that deer wipe them out pretty early on in the growing season. So that has been a real issue for me. That was something that a few years back that brassicas never really were a concern for me as far as over browsing like they were on, say, soybeans or sunflowers and things like that. But all of a sudden I had 2 different plots last year that got completely grazed down to the ground, and one of them I replanted it twice and got a good stand both times. The deer just completely ate them up. But the food sources were really changing at that point. The corn was really starting to turn, the soybeans were really starting to turn, and it limited the food sources that were available during that time of the year, and those whitetails really seek that out. But if you need to protect them, you can 100% feel very confident in protecting these plots for a short amount of time using the Plot Protector Pro from Aircrow LLC. They have a really good product that 100% will keep whitetails and other animals off these plots while they're getting established, while they're getting some growth. That really helps. If you can get those plants to be a little bit bigger, then all of a sudden they start making more forage, right? So a soybean that just comes out is basically just got 2 little tiny leaves when it starts out. Well, once it gets this tall, it's got a bush on it, right? So a whitetail can feed quite a bit on it, and that plant can still grow and still flourish. But if they start eating it when it's just those 2 little leaves, it can't grow fast enough that the deer are eating it, and it's gonna end up killing it, or the plant's gonna stay 4 or 5 inches tall. So if you need a way of protecting that, you can go to www.aircrow.com and get the Plot Protector Pro, and it will really help keep those whitetails out of those plots that you're trying to plant. One of the big things that I have noticed talking to so many food plotters across the country about brassicas, when I talk to folks who were having limited results with their brassicas, almost all of them that I would speak to, I would ask about the fertility. Most of them would say, well, I put a bag of 10-10-10 out there. So we're not putting enough nutrition out there to be able to sustain that plot. Brassicas are not like cereal grains. They're not like annual clovers. They're not like perennial clovers. They're a big plant, and they're using a high volume of fertilizer. While they may not be as much as something like alfalfa or a corn, they still require large amounts of nutrients to be able to grow and be as most successful that they possibly can be. For brassicas, we're looking at adding about 100 pounds of nitrogen to be able to grow those good bulbs at what we're looking at. That 100 pounds of nitrogen is going to be 100 pounds of actual N. So if you've got a bag of 10-10-10, it's 50 pounds. Per 100 pounds, you're getting 10 pounds of nitrogen. So if we can get a bag of 3400 or 4600, we can put 4 bags per acre out there, and we're going to get real close to that 100-pound range needed to raise these things. But just as important is the phosphorus and the potassium levels. I have seen a direct correlation between poor soils with low fertility and deer eating the brassicas less. And maybe that's the difference between the north and the south, why the north typically, not everywhere, before I get a bunch of hate mail, but typically the northern soils are better soils, and typically the further south you get, the poorer the soils. That may be very well why we're seeing that difference between the north and the south, is that the north has a little bit better soil, has a little bit higher fertility in the soil than what us folks in the south do. I have never seen a brassica food plot not do well if the fertility was right. But I have seen a brassica plot not do well that I did not fertilize properly. One of the first years that I planted brassicas, I didn't do anything to it. I dissed the field and I planted it, and there it was. Low in P, low in K, and I didn't put any nitrogen on it. And it was very poor usage that year by the whitetails. Last year, I planted 3 plots of brassicas, fertilized them all well, and had a tremendous amount of deer using these plots all winter long. And last year, we were plagued by those white oak acorns. So to say that we were able to pull some deer into those brassica plots off those white oak acorns was really speaking a large volume for those brassicas and how much those whitetails ate them. All 3 of the plots I did were relatively small. I think the biggest one was 3/4 of an acre. Definitely looking to plant more brassicas this year than what I planted last year, just because of how well those whitetails responded to that. But I did plant a plot that had low pH as well, but had high fertility. And I would say it probably got used less than any of the other plots. That soil pH was around 5.1 in that field, and they did hit it some. They did 100% ate it. I sowed it in and amongst standing corn plot, but I think they definitely did hit that one less than the other 3 where I fertilized it heavily and the pH was fairly close to being right. It just makes sense that the more fertility in the soil, obviously, the more P, the more K, and obviously the more nitrogen, and also the lime being correct, is going to just be able to let that plant uptake more nutrients. And that's just common sense, really, because if the lime's not there, you can have 1,000 pounds of P and K in the soil. It's not going to be able to uptake all those nutrients. It is very important to get your lime, your P, your K, and your nitrogen all correct. That's one kind of packaged deal. So a lot of folks think, well, I'm going to work on my fertilizer this year. Next year I'll work on my lime. It needs to be the opposite. You need to work on lime first, and then you need to work on your fertilizer. Getting that soil at a neutral pH where it can uptake the most amount of nutrients is the single thing that we can do to these plots to make them more nutritious to whitetail. The closer to neutral that is, the more nutrients these whitetails are going to get from eating these food plots that we plant. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Y'all smash that like and subscribe button.